because I had a couple pledge bros from my business fraternity that also went to Lehman, but they were in New York. And I did my summer internship at Bear Stearns in the summer of 2007. And that was obviously really bad timing because we were like the last summer class ever at Bear. But at least I knew that I didn't have a full-time offer to go back to. And so in a way, it was a blessing in disguise because I had the opportunity to go through full-time recruiting because, I didn't have an offer versus my two pledge bros that went to Lehman, New York. I remember like shortly after we started full-time, they like lost their jobs. Did Menlo also like kind of shut down at the same time, or like what was how did that happen? I guess because I don't see you were there for a while. So
Yeah, it was chaos. It's probably the best way to describe it. You can write a whole book on this. Like even for like the window I was time there, like it was just chaos. And as a first time fresh out of the water, I mean post college, I don't know any better. You're getting a front row seat into like probably arguably like just the most chaotic time period in recent time. And
yeah.
so a little bit of the factual history. Bear Stearns went under, I believe, in the spring. And around that time period, there's this contagion effect of like, well, who are the other investment banks that are highly overlevered? And so people were looking at Merrill. They were looking at even like some of the mortgage lenders like Countrywide. They were looking at Lehman. And so I remember the stock price started tumbling and Lehman's name started bubbling up. And I remember asking my buddy, or I forget what it is, but the person who like is like your champion, who's like, part senior on the team. Like I think he was like a VP. I asked him like, hey, I'm seeing all this news around Lehman's stability. Anything to be thinking of here? Little did I know, like he's never going to be like, dude, yeah, it sucks. It's wild here. Like he gave me probably a very typical answer, which is, oh yeah, we're okay, we're all good. And you know what? In fairness, like the market stabilized for a good period of time until the summer. And then the summer, oh my gosh, it was like, and I remember as vividly every single day in training. So we're all in New York. Well, technically we're in Jersey. I think you guys all had the fun time in New York. Lehman was kind of cheap and they put us in New Jersey.
Um,
But it was so cool.
well, they're trying to save money right around that time.
Yeah, they were, especially with their new office in Times Square. But I remember every single day, like almost every single day, the stock price would drop 15%. You don't see that. It's just jarring when you like wake up, when you go, like you're trying to train and all your peers are like on Google Finance. And it's like, I think the stock price was LEH. So you're like looking at it and it's like 15%. And at the time, I don't know if this website's still around, Deal Breaker was coming out with all these rumors like, oh, Lehman stability. Dick Fold just punched a coworker in the gym because he was yelling at Dick Fold, and all these crazy rumors are coming out. And then during training, the general counsel of the entire...
Folks, by the way, Dick Fold was the CEO at the time, for those of you who don't know. But sorry, anyway, continue.
That's right. And so during training, I remember like everyone's just like, whoa, what? It's 15%. Like continuously is a pretty, again, we're fresh out of college kids. It's pretty significant to like think about. And so I remember one of the trainings that general counsel for the entire firm, head of investment banking for the entire firm came by to the training class and just, said the classic words like, we are okay. We're very stable. Don't worry about it. This market, these are all rumors spread by people trying to short the stock. So, the truth will come out, but we are in good shape. We've got all this liquidity, blah, 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 blah. Don't worry about it. And it was just kind of like, okay, like interesting. When people like say, when you have leaders of the firm come out and be like, don't panic, it's kind of counterintuitive. You're like, okay, awkward, but I guess we'll continue on with training. And then, coming back, that's when it just got even more wild, like between us and Merrill Lynch. And then unfortunately they bought Merrill Lynch. So to answer your question, what ended up happening was they bought Merrill Lynch, but by bought, I mean Bank of America did. Lehman went into instant bankruptcy. It got parsed down to assets. There's a layoff right then and there because some people were kind of just floating into the ether depending on what team you were a part of. So if you're a part of Europe, you got into, I think if you're in the Asia, you went to Mitsuo. If you're in Europe, you went to some other bank. And then Lehman got paired up with Barclays. And then 3 months later, and then there's some people like, getting laid off in between. And then there was another layoff in January. And so for me, I had a pretty precarious time. Just to kind of add one more story to make this even spicier. Um, if for me, it was clear neon lights after the Barclays acquisition that I'm going to be so screwed. And to give you an example, um, we originally had a pretty tight knit team, and back then, healthcare biotech was going to be on a tear. If you guys remember, all these patents for biotech for these like Pfizer, like Lipitor, et cetera, were going to go off patent, and they needed to go buy their next star drug, and a number of them were going to face like basically it's just there was going to be an M&A boom, which totally happened. Well, unfortunately, one day the head of investment banking and the head of the Menlo Park office showed up. They grabbed our team specifically, our biotech healthcare team. And at the time, it was just, they're like, they only brought the analyst and the associate into the room. So I'm like, where's the rest of the leadership? And imagine this, you're talking to literally the head of investment banking for the entire firm and another like senior person, head of the Menlo Park office. And they're like, well, just want to start off and come out of the gate and say, your jobs are all safe. And I was like, okay, this is really weird. But your managing director, I won't mention the name on this call, but you can probably look them up, is no longer with the firm, which is basically like we fired him as of today, like immediate fired, and they're using the nicest way possible of saying he crossed the line. And I'm like, this is wild. Like the head of the West Coast for this team is just like gone. And the next most senior person is an associate. And then there's like 4 analysts. And so we got what was originally a growth plan to expand the team became this awkward team dynamic. And I'm like, I'm so screwed. We don't need this many analysts. And literally, we don't have a head anymore of the team. And so that's when I started recruiting and looking out different jobs out there. And it was tough. It was either like, okay, what am I going to do in a situation where, unfortunately, fresh out of college, do I go to a different career path? Because banking and everything around finance is more or less toxic. And then if you guys remember, for maybe the people listening in the room, there's this program called TARP that was initiated by the government around this time period to help a lot of the banks shore up their balance sheet. But what that meant for a lot of them is they couldn't hire. Like there was more or less a hiring freeze and a lot of constraints if you were taking TARP money. And so I'm like, oh my God, like what a weird time period to be like, I thought graduating, oh, this is so awesome. I worked so hard to get to here to only find out like my career path is literally upside down. I have, everyone's like searching for jobs, and even the jobs in investment banking is like very far few in between because of frankly, this world crisis.
Yeah.
Or this financial crisis. So I threw my resume out at a few boutiques. There's one that I wish I got, I didn't get it, but you can imagine the name of it. It was at the time just founding and eventually would become one of the leading boutiques, unsurprisingly, because of this rainmaker. So I wish I got that one. They had just formed there, but it is what it is. It starts with a particular letter that isn't very frequent.
Yeah.
For words. But another one.
How many months in was this into your first year?
This is like, it depends on if you count training or not, but I came back from training late August. And then frankly, it was like September 19, 20, or 21 around that time period.
Right at the very beginning, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And your head's spinning because things are moving so fast that 2 things are happening. You're like, what am I going to do today?
Yeah.
And if you guys are thinking about career investment banking, you're client dependent. So if your firm is literally under threat of stability or you're in bankruptcy, well, are you going to work with a bankrupt company? No. You can imagine the client, you're like, should I still work with you guys? Like, can you guys even do work if you're in bankruptcy? So like everyone is kind of sitting on their thumbs, which is like, what do you do?
Yeah.
And then you had your bosses telling you, hey, what should I do? And the boss that eventually got fired, but he was telling me, he's like, look, I can't say these words, but I'm going to be really straight with you. I would recommend you cover your bases. I remember those words exactly. And so I'm like, what the heck? And then imagine this, you're in an office where people are openly printing their resumes to job search. That was how crazy the wild, you don't do that. You just like back in time period where people were printing resumes, but like literally people were just openly job searching like on Indeed or whatever the websites were back then. That's how wild it was. But luckily there was a bank called Jefferies that had not taken TARP money. They're priding themselves of, we are open for business. And as a result, your balance sheet, disciplined, and we're here to hire. So there was a really unique opportunity to lateral to Jefferies, which I think had a better known brand in the mid-market. And I'm like, look, either this or I might not have a career in investment banking. So it was the one that made the most sense. And I'm very, very fortunate to have landed in banking. Not only that, and also into technology, which I actually like. I think deep down is my deep passion.
Yeah. Wow. It's a very spicy story. Like you said, hot Cheetos status. But so, I mean, I got to imagine though, because at the time, so it sounds like they fired all the senior folks and they were
Mhm.
some going to try to keep the junior folks because I guess you guys are relatively cheap anyway. But it's not like you were the only person that was looking to jump ship. So, and there aren't that many jobs around. So I imagine it was super competitive. Like, where did the rest of your class end up? Like, did they leave
Yeah.
bank? Because like my two pledge bros that, were in New York, I think they just ended up leaving banking altogether. Like, they couldn't even stay in it.
So let me like preface, no one was immune to these industry challenges. And I say that because, so if you just focus on Lehman for a second, yeah, that Jefferies interview, my peers were interviewing for that job. And I'm like, oh my God, there's like literally one of one position right now. And I don't know if I'm going to get it. And like, we're all like running in, like, it was not a good situation for that regard. But yeah, a lot of people were lateraling to different banks that usually like smaller banks that were not balanced, that did not have this sales and trading operation where you could leverage yourself in such a, bluntly put, toxic way. So I saw a lot of my peers do that. I saw many of them exit the industry entirely. So one of them, one of my Lehman classmates, who I became pretty close with, he literally exited entirely. Now, in fairness to him, he ended up taking a job in HR for what was eventually going to be, or not eventually, what was a company called DoorDash. And it was like 50 employees. And so he ended up becoming eventually their head of people several years later. And you guys all know, like the DoorDash is now this tens of billions dollar market cap. I would say he did fairly well for himself. So
Yeah.
there's very unique situations like that. I did see, but going back to the comment of like no one was immune. I had friends even at Goldman Sachs, arguably one of the top investment banks. They got pushed out of investment banking. So one of them, I won't mention her name, but you know her very well. It was just weird. She got pushed into, and she was like, to give you a sense of her credentials, like perfect score SAT, like almost perfect GPA, was in a really great group, TMT and Goldman, but they just didn't have the work. And so she got pushed into comms. And by comms, I mean, she was writing letters for the executive team that would eventually go out to, the letters that they would go out to market because they're trying to save great talent, but people were trying to figure out what to do. One of, I think your friends, I remember very well, she was at one of my good friends. She was at a bank called Credit Suisse. They literally gave her this weird offer of like, please don't work for us for 2 years. We're going to give you a package, and just like go do something else for like a year or two. And like, we'll pay you, I think it was like 60K. So it was a little bit of a haircut to the full-time salary, but like, go do something else, go travel with this and then come back. And I'm like, wow, this is just so weird. Like this whole situation, but people were worried. Banks were worried about the brand. They're worried about the repercussions. So some of them were really trying to rehome people in
Yeah.
different parts of the company to buy time. But yeah, a lot of people ended up exiting regardless of what investment bank you're at, because I mean, as everyone knows, it's now considered the global financial recession
Yeah.
for a reason. Like a lot of people were really hurting, and yeah, it was just tough to give work to all these analysts in a period where you don't probably frankly need that many.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously, again, I was fortunate enough to find out earlier, right, that I didn't have full-time offer. So then I could at least go through the full-time recruiting process. But the full-time recruiting process back in '08 was probably just similarly bad as what you had to go through because again, not a lot of firms hiring, not a lot of jobs. I interviewed everywhere. I got rejected by probably 20 plus firms because no one wanted to hire me because I didn't get a return offer. And then I remember like getting every single interview I applied for full time because I had Bear Stearns on my resume. And then first question, every interview is always like, did you get a return offer? And then the answer would be no, but you've been reading the news, right? But like people didn't care. And I got rejections like basically everywhere. And then I remember I had my last two super days left. There was the only two firms I still had left, and it was Deutsche Bank and Jefferies. Deutsche Tech and Jefferies Tech, and the super days were on the same day. It was like I think DB was like 101 California, and then Jefferies is like just down the street, like 600 California or something like that.
In San Francisco. Okay. Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
there, so it was like 2 blocks down on California Street. And I remember like doing my super day in the morning with DB, like back to back to back to back interviews, right? And then like
Yeah.
running in the street to Jefferies to do my Jefferies
Yeah.
super day in the afternoon. DB had like the first year I announced I was going to be 5 people. They have 4 returning interns. So it was one spot. I think there were like
Wow.
12 of us at super day going for that one spot. And then Jefferies, I don't know the exact numbers because I didn't end up going there. But crazy enough, for some reason, those were the 2 offers that I got in the end. Like,
That's awesome.
it
And
was
that's all
like,
that matters.
yeah, it was like that. I don't know what it was. And it was like going through so many interviews and being rejected, but getting those live reps under my belt. Maybe I got gradually better at interviewing, or maybe it's like, hey, back against the wall is now or never. You know, like, and you just like perform better. I have no idea, dude. But
Totally.
anyway, that's how I broke in. And it was like this close. It was just so tough back then. But I guess
Totally.
like the follow-up question I wanted to ask, and then, we'll move on from this point
Yeah,
is,
yeah.
I think we're now at a time, because that was '08, 17 years ago. And then we just been in this like bull market, like
17, man.
2 decades, right? And then now we're finally at the point again where the market feels a little bit choppy, and then people are like kind of worried, like, oh, is there going to be another recession? And then people are talking about like, oh, bond yields are spiking and whatever, right? Not saying anything's going to happen, but there's also this whole new thing of like AI taking jobs. And I think like for the folks that are in college now, maybe they're graduating, I think a lot of them are feeling that uneasiness that we probably felt back then in terms of like environment that they're entering into. So obviously we're like laughing about our experience now, but back then, like we were laughing, right? But with,
Survivorship bias. But yeah.
with the benefit of hindsight, like was there anything you learned now looking back on kind of what you went through, just in terms of like advice that you would give to people today who are, going through this current period?
Yeah. And I think if I had to reframe, like if I had narrowed down advice for people going through in a period of uncertainty, particularly around banking and like how to think about this. And what did I learn at least that could be
Yeah,
applied
just like
today?
or just career uncertainty or
Yeah.
market, just things that feel like they're kind of out of your control, right? Like, what do you like? Because obviously, look, it worked out in the end, right? Like, you're doing great. I'm doing great. All of our friends, even the ones that lost their job, a lot of them are doing great, right?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah. A
it-
lot of, yeah. A lot of thoughts come to mind. And what's hard about what I'm about to say might not make any sense, but maybe for everyone in the room, if there's like follow-up emails, I'm happy to clarify. Like none of it makes sense. Back then, when you don't know any better, it almost feels like this is like banking or consulting or accounting. It's like it almost feels like life or death. Like if I don't get into this career, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And I remember feeling that sense of anxiety. And I even remember like during the Lehman Brothers stuff, I'm like, I remember this very clear decision in my head. Like I may not have a career in investment banking, but it almost felt like a little bit like a choice. Like I could choose to give up, or I could go choose to go commit and find a banking job and do, the time and the learning and everything that I felt like I really wanted. And so there's this element of like a choice that I think we all have, regardless in any situation of like, I could choose to give up or I can choose to be persistent. I can choose to try again. I could choose, maybe it's not my top choice, but I could choose. Like, I really do believe I want a career in investment banking, and I choose, maybe it's not my top bank I wanted, but like, I'm going to go to this other one or this other one or this other one, or maybe it's more localized. In hindsight, there's a couple of things that stand out to me. One, I think social media and like there's more knowledge and the work that you're doing, I think has dispelled that it doesn't have to feel like life or death. In fact, you have a lot more autonomy than you realize. And there's different ways to, if you really are committed to get into the industries, there's a lot more optionality to go do just that. And I've had friends who didn't get into banking at college, and I know you're friends with them, but they did get into it 2, 3, 4 years later. They did something else. They went to get an MBA. They did it, or they did banking at a different bank. They put in their time. And then, like you probably know, like in banking, good talent is far few in between, especially people who don't get burnt out for it. Some people do really well and they love it.
Yeah.
And those are the folks who are like, yeah, like other banks would be like, wow, hey, like I need you on my team. I need people who are going to, do a great job and work really hard. And I've heard great things about you. Opportunities like that will continue to come. And it may feel like there's some periods uncertain, but look, if you really want to do something like banking or something else, it's going to be okay. But on the flip side of it, the story of my friend, it's perfectly okay doing something else too.
Yeah.
I am amazed with, and I would almost say like what's been more, it's going to feel weird, but it almost feels more acceptable. Back then, it almost felt like you had to get ABC. Whereas nowadays, I see a lot of people going to join an early stage startup and get a fantastic experience. And it almost feels like there's a strong allure there. And it feels like the optionality is really open. You don't have to feel like, oh my God, it's this, or like now I have to go, my life's like off course. No, like my friend's a perfect example. I mean, how many people listening on the call would be like, I wish I could have joined a company like DoorDash as like the first people hire and then work through the ranks and is now a $60 billion company. That's incredible of a story. And I think he's like really, really comfortable now. He's like now doing coaching. It's great. Just like a great individual, but it just shows that there's so many more doors to life.
Yeah.
But I think a universal truth is it's your mental game. How do you approach this? And are you approaching it with an intentional decision? And then also, are you using this as a learning experience? If you didn't get in, are you like, oh, woe is me, doom and gloom? To be honest, I don't see those people ever being successful in life. And I'm just going to call it what it is. Hey, woe is me. This is all against me. No matter what, the best people, the best talent I've ever hired, the best people I've ever worked with are those who are like, even if the cards didn't work their way, they made it work.
Yep.
They made intentional decisions. Maybe they went into banking or maybe they did something else, but they use it as a learning experience, as an opportunity versus shoot, like, woe is me. So I encourage everything at a minimum. Everything is an opportunity. Look at it from that lens. And if you look at that, there's going to be opportunities that will eventually fall your way.
Yeah, that's so good. I agree. I was going to say like my take on the whole thing is, and as someone who graduated at the same time and went through similar things, is what I've learned over time is that, banking obviously is a great career and I'm super grateful that I started my career in banking, but there are many different ways to be successful. And also, I think kind of a different way of saying the same thing that you just said, which is the cream will always rise to the top. There are always going to be things that are outside of your control. You can't control the economy. You can't control if like a bank is going to collapse. You can't control if AI is coming for all of our jobs. Like those are not things that you can control. So like just there's no point worrying about something you can't change, right? And rather you should be spending your mental bandwidth on the things that you can control, which is, being resilient, not giving up and looking for the new opportunities and adapting to a new environment and learning new skills that will allow you to still thrive in this new world that we live in now with AI and whatever. And so it's like, there will always be two camps. There will always be those who are successful and those who are not. And I think the way they think and the way they behave, they're fundamentally very different. And like, if someone, it's funny, like, there's like this channel on YouTube called like the School of Hard Knocks. I don't know if you've seen their videos. It's just like this kid walking around and then he goes to like really rich neighborhoods, like Beverly Hills or Miami or New York. And he just like, if he sees a, really expensive car, he'll like walk up and like interview the guy. He's like, sir, excuse me, can I interview you for a second? Like, is this your car? Like, how did you get so rich? Like, what did you do? And a lot of these people were like, they started their business, they sold it, exited, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And one of the questions they always ask is like, if you lost all of your money tomorrow, would you be able to make it back? And every single one of them is like, yeah, absolutely. Right. Because it's just like, they got there once and they know how to get back there. Right. And because they have like the traits that you need to be successful. So
100%.
yeah, that's really, really, really good advice.